There is a particular kind of loneliness that never announces itself. It lives quietly behind soft laughter, polite nods, and the small practiced smiles that drift across a person's face when someone asks, "Are you okay?" It is the loneliness that does not demand to be seen. It tucks itself into the corners of busy days, blends into conversations, and hides behind gestures so gentle that nobody ever thinks to look closer. People who carry this loneliness move through the world with a strange elegance, balancing heaviness and hope, silence and longing. Their smiles are not lies, they are survival. And somewhere inside, beneath the familiar gestures and carefully steady breaths, lives a quiet wish that someone might notice the truth they never learned to say aloud. There is a moment, almost imperceptible, when the small smile forms. It appears before the person has even decided what to say. A gentle curve of the lips, a softening of the eyes, a practiced expression that drifts into place the way a curtain falls at the end of a scene. It is automatic now, an instinct shaped by years of becoming agreeable, composed, easy to be around. In that small smile lives an entire emotional performance, not a dramatic one, not a desperate attempt to deceive, just a quiet smoothing of edges, a subtle adjustment of tone, the kind of performance that doesn't ask for applause because the goal is simply to keep the world calm, predictable, manageable. For people who hide their loneliness, the small smile is rarely a lie. It is more like a translation, an attempt to turn complicated feelings into a version that won't make the room colder, heavier, or more confusing. It's the emotional equivalent of tidying up a space before anyone visits, even if the mess hasn't truly gone anywhere. When someone asks, "How have you been?" the smile arrives before the truth has a chance to surface. It isn't that the truth is forbidden. It just feels too raw, too large, too difficult to hand to someone who may not know what to do with it. So the smile answers on their behalf. There's a tenderness in this gesture, a kind of quiet respect for the emotional boundaries of others. Many who carry hidden loneliness were once praised for being so easy, so mature, so self-sufficient. Over time, the performance became less about protection and more about identity. But beneath that composed exterior is a different scene, one marked by a soft exhaustion, a longing to be understood without explanation, and a slow burning ache that never fully disappears. They move through conversations like careful navigators, measuring their tone, editing their words, adjusting their presence, not because they want to manipulate how they're seen, but because they learned, somewhere along the way, that their inner world might be too heavy, too confusing, too inconvenient. So instead, they offer brightness, warmth, stability, even when they themselves feel unsteady. In quiet moments, when the day has ended and the mask no longer needs to stay lifted, the small smile fades, not into sadness, just into stillness. That is often when the loneliness speaks the loudest, when there are no conversations to fill the space, no roles to play, no expressions to maintain. It's a loneliness that rarely looks dramatic from the outside. It doesn't erupt or spill over. Instead, it lingers like a faint echo, shaping the person's inner rhythm, influencing the way they step into the world the next morning. People who master this small smile performance often become the steady presence in other people's lives. They listen well. They hold space without taking up much of it themselves. Their loneliness becomes something they carry quietly, folded neatly within them like a letter never sent. Sometimes they wonder if anyone notices. Sometimes they wish someone would. But when someone does look a little too closely, concern in their eyes, the instinctive smile returns as if to reassure both of them. Everything is fine. You don't have to worry. This is the paradox of their loneliness. They long to be understood, yet protect others from their truth. They crave closeness, yet fear that closeness might reveal more than they are ready to show. The quiet performance is not meant to deceive. It is meant to preserve. A way of moving through the world that keeps their deepest feelings intact, untouched, and mostly unseen. But every performance has a cost, and every small smile carries a story that begins not with deception, but with a simple, universal desire. To belong without becoming a burden. To be seen without being exposed. To feel connected, even in the silence they never learned to break. Loneliness rarely begins in adulthood. It usually has an origin, a quiet place where a child first learns to hold their emotions carefully, almost protectively, as if revealing them might shift the balance of the world around them. In these early years, the lessons are subtle. A parent sighs when the child cries too long. A teacher praises them for being so good, meaning so quiet, so undemanding. A sibling needs more attention, so the child decides, without ever putting it into words, that their own needs should stay small. This is how the small smile begins. Not as a deliberate mask, but as a response to the emotional landscape they grew up in. The child senses, intuitively, that some feelings are welcome and others are not. They learn that warmth and cooperation earn approval, while sadness or confusion create tension, discomfort, or disappointment. So they adapt. They shrink certain emotions. They stretch others. They build a personality that fits the expectations around them as gently and precisely as possible. And somewhere along the way, loneliness begins to shape itself inside them, quietly, like a room that slowly loses its color. Some children discover early that asking for comfort comes with unpredictability. Sometimes adults respond with kindness, other times with impatience, distraction, or silence. So the child makes a bargain with themselves. It's better not to ask. It's safer not to need. This bargain becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes a personality. Hidden loneliness doesn't start with dramatic neglect. Often it begins with small, consistent moments of emotional misalignment. Times when the child feels deeply, yet receives only half attention. Times when they want tenderness, but their environment rewards composure. They learn to read the room with extraordinary sensitivity. They become observers, quietly scanning the moods of adults, sensing tension before anyone speaks, becoming adept at adjusting their own presence to ease the atmosphere. This early emotional vigilance becomes part of their identity. And because children cannot fully understand their own emotional experience, they interpret the lack of attunement in the only way a child can. Maybe my feelings are too much. Maybe my sadness is inconvenient. Maybe being easy to handle is how I earn love. So they practice it. They perfect it. They live it. Their small smile becomes a way of saying, "See, I'm fine. You don't have to worry about me." Sometimes the origins are quieter still. Parents who were loving but overwhelmed. Caregivers who provided safety, but not emotional presence. People who cared deeply, but didn't know how to sit with vulnerability, even their own. Children growing up in these environments learn something crucial. Emotions must be managed alone. This independence becomes admirable to others. Teachers praise their maturity. Family members rely on their steadiness. Friends see them as the strong one, the calm one, the one who never asks for too much. But inside, the early emptiness continues to echo. Not loudly, not painfully, just persistently, shaping how they move through the world long after childhood ends. They become adults who still feel responsible for maintaining emotional harmony. Adults who downplay their distress because they once learned that distress makes relationships precarious. Adults who smile gently, even when their heart feels tender, heavy, or unseen. The loneliness they carry is not rooted in dramatic abandonment. It's rooted in adaptation, in responding to an environment that never fully made space for the fullness of who they were. And this is the quiet truth. Loneliness doesn't just come from being alone. It comes from being unseen while surrounded by people. It comes from early experiences that taught a child to soften their emotional presence, to protect others from their feelings, to shrink themselves in exchange for stability. The small smile that appears in adulthood is simply the continuation of a habit formed long ago. A habit shaped in childhood rooms, filled with affectionate intentions, but incomplete understanding, in early echoes of silence, where the child whispered their feelings to themselves because no one else knew how to hear them. Beneath the gentle smile that hides loneliness, the brain is doing something remarkably complex. It is not simply masking emotion. It is performing a carefully coordinated psychological maneuver, shaped by years of learning how to stay safe in social spaces. Human beings are wired for connection. From infancy, the nervous system looks for cues of safety. A warm tone, a soft face, a steady presence. But when emotional expression leads to confusion or unpredictability, the brain shifts its strategy. It begins to favor protection over revelation. For people who hide their loneliness, this shift becomes an internal blueprint. Their nervous system learns early that vulnerability may not be met with understanding. So the brain recruits its defense systems to make emotional concealment feel automatic, almost instinctive. One of the key players is the amygdala, the part of the brain that scans for danger. To a child who experienced subtle emotional inconsistency, the danger isn't physical harm. It's the fear of destabilizing relationships with their own needs. Over time, the amygdala becomes hypersensitive to the possibility of rejection, disapproval, or emotional burdening. But the brain doesn't want to live in fear. It wants balance. So the prefrontal cortex steps in, smoothing the emotional response, reshaping it into something palatable. The small smile, a gesture of safety, a symbolic reassurance to others and to oneself that everything is under control. This is why the smile feels so natural. It isn't thought out. The brain has simply learned, over many years, that it is the easiest way to maintain harmony without risking exposure. There is also a phenomenon known as emotional suppression, which activates neural pathways that dampen the body's physiological reactions to sadness or stress. At first, suppression feels like strength. It allows a person to keep functioning, keep engaging, keep appearing okay. But it has a silent cost. The emotions that aren't expressed don't disappear. They accumulate inside the brain. Suppressed loneliness is stored in memory networks, linked with previous experiences of being dismissed, misunderstood, or emotionally overextended. When triggered, these memories reactivate old patterns, reinforcing the instinct to hide. Attachment theory offers another layer of explanation. Individuals who developed an avoidant or anxious avoidant attachment style often struggle to trust that their emotions will be met with care. Their early environment taught them that self-reliance was safer than reaching out. So their brain builds emotional walls carefully disguised as warmth politeness, or humor. The small smile becomes the perfect compromise, connection without vulnerability. From a social psychology perspective, people who hide loneliness often excel at something called impression management. Not manipulation, but gentle self-editing. They soften their edges to match the emotional tone of the room. They attune themselves to subtle cues, shaping their expression to ensure that others feel comfortable. This skill is so refined that it often becomes mistaken for emotional stability. Others see calmness, they see composure, they see resilience, but internally, the person is continually regulating, adjusting, buffering. Their brain is multitasking, balancing the desire for closeness with the need to stay protected. Over time, these patterns become neurologically reinforced. Neural pathways strengthen with repetition, making the small smile feel like second nature. Even when loneliness deepens, the body still chooses familiarity over vulnerability. This is why breaking the pattern feels so difficult. The brain is not fighting against others. It is fighting against itself, against old wiring that once kept it safe, against a lifetime of practicing emotional restraint. Yet the brain is also capable of incredible change. Even the most deeply rooted patterns can shift when met with understanding, connection, and gentleness. But in this chapter, understanding the science does one quiet, powerful thing. It reveals that the small smile is not weakness. It is not avoidance. It is an adaptive strategy, one the brain created to protect a person who had to learn emotional independence too soon. Behind that gentle expression is a nervous system trying its best. A mind that learned to stay composed because the world once felt unpredictable. A heart that hides not because it wants distance, but because it learned that being open came with risks it wasn't ready to take. Loneliness in this context becomes not a flaw, but a neurological artifact, a trace of old survival strategies carried into the present. And the smile, it is the brain's way of saying, "This is how I learned to stay safe." There is a subtle, persistent tension inside people who hide their loneliness, a quiet pull between two selves. One self longs for closeness, for someone to notice the heaviness beneath their calm exterior. The other works tirelessly to maintain distance, protecting them from the vulnerability that closeness inevitably requires. These two selves rarely speak aloud. Instead, they weave themselves into daily life like opposing internal currents. The longing self is soft. It notices the warmth in other people's voices. It lingers in conversations that feel genuine. It aches when someone asks, "Are you sure you're okay?" with a tone that sounds like they truly mean it. This self remembers the hunger for understanding that was once ignored or misunderstood. It carries the quiet hope that someone might one day recognize the loneliness beneath the surface smile, not through dramatic confessions, but through gentle presence. But the protective self is stronger, more practiced, more disciplined. It steps in quickly, smoothing emotions, adjusting tone, restoring the familiar facade. It has spent years keeping the person safe from rejection, disappointment, or emotional overwhelm. It knows how to take charge, how to silence the ache before it escapes into the world. And so the smile returns, the softening of the eyes, the easygoing voice, even when inside something small collapses. This conflict is rarely visible to others. On the outside, the person seems steady, dependable, emotionally balanced. But within them exists a constant negotiation. Should they say what they truly feel, or stay quiet, maintain peace, avoid risking discomfort? Should they reach out when the loneliness spikes unexpectedly? Or wait for the feeling to pass, telling themselves they don't want to bother anyone? Most of the time, the protective self wins, not because it's stronger in essence, but because its habits are older. It learned long ago that emotional restraint earns acceptance, while vulnerability feels unpredictable. People who carry this conflict often find themselves in relationships where they give more than they receive. Not because others demand it, but because offering support feels safe, while receiving it feels foreign. They know how to comfort, soothe, and stabilize. They do not know how to hand someone their loneliness without feeling guilty. So they offer kindness instead of truth. They offer presence instead of confession. They offer the small smile instead of the deeper story. This creates a different kind of loneliness, one that persists even in the company of people who care. A loneliness born not from isolation, but from the inability to hand someone the weight they carry. The longing self whispers, maybe they would understand. The protective self replies, but what if they don't? And the smile appears before either argument finishes. There is also the fear of being misread. People who hide their loneliness are often so careful with their emotions that being misunderstood feels like a deeper wound than being unseen. They prefer invisibility over misinterpretation, silence over the risk of exposing something fragile, only to have it brushed aside. Their internal world becomes a private landscape, expansive, emotional, tender. But it is rarely shared, only glimpsed through quiet sighs, tired eyes, or pauses that linger 1 second too long. Sometimes connection feels close. Someone listens more intently. Someone asks a second time. Someone stays just a little longer than expected. In those moments, the longing self leans forward, hopeful, but the protective self holds it back, whispering reminders of past disappointments, past misunderstandings, past moments where openness felt like a mistake. And so the person stays silent. They smile, they say, "Really, I'm fine," even as something inside curls inward, gently, like a flower closing at night. This inner conflict does not make them weak. It makes them human, caught between the desire to be known and the instinct to stay safe. The tension between these two selves becomes the quiet heartbeat of their emotional life. A pulse that says, "I want to be seen. I'm afraid to be seen. I want to be close. I don't know how to stay open." It is not dramatic. It is not chaotic. It simply exists, an intimate paradox carried within them, shaping every smile, every silence, every moment of connection they both yearn for and fear. There comes a moment, quiet, unexpected, when the small smile doesn't form as easily as it used to. Not because the person wants to reveal their loneliness, but because something inside grows tired of carrying it alone. These moments are subtle. A pause too long before answering a question. A voice that wavers slightly at the end of a sentence. Eyes that look away, not out of shyness, but because they cannot maintain the familiar brightness no one else notices. Or if they do, they interpret it as simple fatigue. But inside, the person feels the shift, the facade, once effortless, becoming heavier. Loneliness has a way of accumulating in the body. It gathers quietly in the chest, creating a heaviness that deepens at night. It settles in the shoulders, woven into the muscles that tense whenever the person needs to appear fine. It lingers in the throat, stuck between the truth they wish they could speak and the silence they have always chosen instead. Eventually, the body speaks before the mind does. Some feel it in the way they linger longer in bed, unable to summon the familiar emotional composure. Others notice it when they catch their reflection and see, not sadness, but a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. The mask falters most noticeably in moments of unexpected tenderness. Someone asks, "Are you sure you're okay?" Not casually, but with genuine concern, and for a brief second, the truth rises. It reaches the surface like a breath held underwater for too long. There is an urge to answer honestly, to say, "I'm lonely," to admit that the small smile has been doing too much work. But then the familiar instinct returns, soft, swift, protective. They swallow the truth, reshape their expression, and offer reassurance instead. Still, the moment leaves an imprint. The person feels the internal shake, the quiet recognition that hiding is becoming harder. Not because circumstances became worse, but because their heart is beginning to resist the old habits. Another kind of crack appears during periods of overwhelming emotion. Sometimes it comes after a long day that stretches the limits of their emotional endurance. Sometimes after hearing news that touches old wounds. Sometimes for no reason at all, an unidentifiable heaviness rising suddenly, unexpectedly. In these moments, the small smile fades, not out of choice, but out of sheer inability to hold it together. They might close their door and sit in silence, feeling the loneliness pulse through them with a clarity they cannot ignore. They might cry, not loudly, but quietly, as if apologizing for their own tears. They might feel a sudden longing, intense and startling, for someone to simply sit beside them without asking for explanations. This is the turning point most people don't see. It doesn't happen in dramatic breakdowns or visible emotional outbursts. It happens in these soft collapses, private, internal, fleeting. Moments when the person realizes the mask is no longer protecting them, it is isolating them. And so the questions begin to change. Instead of, "How do I hide this?" the mind begins to whisper, "Is there someone who would understand?" Instead of, "I shouldn't say anything," a softer thought appears. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to let a little truth out. The person doesn't act on these thoughts yet. The protective instincts are still strong, but something inside shifts. The wall that once felt solid now has a hairline fracture, a crack that lets in light, a crack that lets out a sigh, a crack that suggests loneliness isn't meant to be carried indefinitely in silence. This faltering mask is not failure. It is the psyche's way of signaling that the emotional burden has grown too heavy to manage alone. It is the body's quiet cry for gentleness. It is the heart's first step toward wanting connection, even if the mind still resists. When the mask falters, something begins. Not something dramatic, but something true. A realization. The small smile has been a faithful protector, but even protectors grow tired. And beneath the soft collapse lies an emerging truth. That being seen, even briefly, might hurt less than remaining invisible forever. Healing for people who hide their loneliness does not arrive in sweeping revelations or sudden emotional breakthroughs. It unfolds quietly, almost hesitantly, like a door opening a fraction wider each day. Not enough to expose everything, but enough to let a little light in. The first step is rarely spoken. It is felt, a subtle shift inside, where the longing for connection becomes slightly stronger than the fear of vulnerability. The person begins to sense that being understood might not be as dangerous as it once seemed. But they approach this possibility with caution. They do not leap, they inch. The process begins with tiny disclosures, soft admissions wrapped in careful language. Phrases like, "It's been a bit hard lately," or "I'm just a little tired these days." They are small truths, partial truths. But for someone who has spent years masking their inner world, they are monumental. These moments often happen in safe spaces, during late-night conversations, quiet car rides, or gentle exchanges where the other person asks with sincerity rather than obligation. Even then, the disclosure comes with hesitation. The person watches closely, studying the reaction, scanning for signs of discomfort or misunderstanding. When the other person responds with warmth, something inside loosens, just slightly, just enough. The body notices first. A breath comes more easily. The shoulders soften. The chest feels less constricted, as though the loneliness has been handed a little room to breathe. This is the early stage of being seen, not fully, not completely, but enough to let the heart feel less alone. Over time, these small admissions stack quietly on top of each other. A brief mention of stress, a confession of feeling overwhelmed, a soft acknowledgement of needing company. Each one becomes a tiny act of bravery. Yet even as openness grows, resistance lingers. There are days when the person retreats again, slipping back into old patterns of silence and emotional self-containment. When this happens, they often blame themselves, believing they've failed at vulnerability. But these setbacks are not failures. They are remnants of an old survival system trying to protect them. Healing is non-linear, and for those who hide their loneliness, it often comes in waves. One day they might share a painful truth, surprising even themselves. The next, they might return to smiling softly, insisting they're okay even when they feel a quiet ache inside. This oscillation is part of the process. Slowly, something deeper begins to shift. They start to realize that vulnerability is not a transaction. It is a rhythm, a slow unfolding that requires patience from both sides. They learn to trust not because someone demands it, but because, over time, consistent gentleness teaches their nervous system a new language. They begin to see that connection doesn't always require grand revelations. Sometimes it shows up in the simplest forms, sitting beside someone without needing to speak, receiving a message that says, "I thought of you," laughing genuinely instead of politely, letting their smile fade when they're tired, letting their voice soften when they're hurting. These small shifts accumulate slowly, almost invisibly, and through them, the person begins to experience something unfamiliar, being held emotionally without needing to earn it through composure or self-sufficiency. This realization changes the way they relate to themselves too. The judgment softens. The inner critic grows quieter. The protective self no longer dominates every interaction. The longing self, once timid, once silenced, finally gains space to breathe, to speak, to be felt. And then comes an unexpected moment, a moment when they allow themselves to be comforted, not because they are falling apart, but because they finally believe they deserve care in their ordinary, unpolished state. This is the truest turning point. Not that they stop hiding completely, but that they learn to stay a little longer in the presence of someone who genuinely wants to know them. Healing becomes an act of presence, not breaking open, but gently unfolding. Not revealing everything, but revealing enough. Not abandoning the small smile, but letting it coexist with the full range of their humanity. They learn that being seen slowly is still being seen. And in this gradual, compassionate unveiling, loneliness begins to soften. Not erased, not defeated, but finally shared. There comes a time when the small smile changes. It no longer exists solely to protect, to deflect, or to maintain emotional harmony. It becomes something gentler, an expression that carries truth instead of concealment, a quiet sign that the person is no longer living entirely behind their mask. This transformation is subtle. It doesn't look like triumph. It looks like softness. The person begins to move through life with a slower, more honest rhythm, not exposing everything, not forcing vulnerability, simply allowing themselves to exist without constantly adjusting their emotional expression to meet the expectations of others. For the first time, they experience moments where their internal world aligns with their external one. When they feel lonely, they allow the loneliness to breathe instead of burying it beneath a practiced grin. When they feel content, the smile comes naturally, warm, unstressed, unperformed. This alignment feels strange at first, almost unfamiliar, as though they are meeting themselves again after years of distance. But the heart recognizes the truth of it. The return to self begins quietly, through small rituals of honesty, pausing before answering, giving themselves permission to feel without rushing to edit the emotion, letting their face rest naturally instead of lifting the corners of their mouth out of habit, allowing silence to exist in conversations without filling it with politeness or reassurance. In these moments, the person discovers something they never expected. They are allowed to take up emotional space, not dramatically, not excessively, just enough. Enough to say, "Today was heavy." Enough to admit, "I felt lonely this week." Enough to feel held instead of hidden. Their relationships begin to shift in response. The people who truly care lean in, gently matching the new openness. There is no demand, no pressure, just presence. Conversations become deeper in soft, natural ways. Connection becomes less about performing warmth and more about sharing it. The protective self, once dominant, learns to step back, not disappearing, just relaxing its grip. It begins to understand that vulnerability does not guarantee hurt. Sometimes it invites connection, and the longing self, once silenced, steps forward with a tentative kind of courage. It learns that expressing need does not make one a burden. It learns that loneliness, when spoken aloud, loses some of its weight. Slowly, the two selves merge, not perfectly, but peacefully. The person becomes someone who can still smile gently, but with authenticity. Their smile no longer hides their emotions. It coexists with them. It becomes a reflection of their complexity instead of a cover for it. Loneliness itself transforms as well. It doesn't vanish. Loneliness is part of being human, but it no longer feels like an isolated room within them. Instead, it becomes a landscape they can walk through rather than remain trapped inside. There are still days when the old habits return. Days when the instinct to say, "I'm fine," rises automatically, when vulnerability feels too heavy. But now, the person recognizes these moments with compassion rather than judgment. Healing has taught them this truth, that growth is not the absence of old patterns, but the ability to choose differently, even if only sometimes. In the quiet of their own thoughts, they begin to speak to themselves with kindness. They no longer scold their loneliness. They listen to it. They acknowledge it. They let it sit beside them without shame. And slowly, life begins to feel a little less sharp. The world does not change dramatically, but their place in it does. They no longer move through it as someone invisible. They begin to feel their own presence, solid, tender, worthy. In this soft return to themselves, they discover something they once believed was out of reach, a sense of inner companionship, a gentle knowing that they can be both strong and vulnerable, both contained and open, both independent and held. The small smile remains, but its meaning shifts. It becomes a symbol, not of what they hide, but of what they have reclaimed. The right to be seen in quiet ways, the courage to exist honestly, the tenderness that comes from finally belonging to themselves. And in that delicate transformation, loneliness loses its sharpest edges. It becomes just another emotion passing through, no longer a secret, no longer a burden, no longer something they must face alone. It becomes simply human, simply theirs, and they carry it with grace.